Thank you.
No problem. Cool. So, no other questions. We'll go through the script, and I'll be giving um, direction for everyone, even though there's only you three here for the actual event. Okay. So
Mhm.
don't be surprised if I'm talking about people who aren't here. It's for the recording. All right, I am in the script. If you want to, have the script open
Yeah.
on your computer screens, that may help you. I will try to refer to page numbers and verse numbers um, as I talk about this. Page one, I am looking to do myself. I played voice one in Chicago, and I just want to do it for old time's sake. So I asked Barb if I can start things off on page one. It's all about darkness, peace, um, beauty, um, very detailed. It even talks about the grass growing on the hill. It's got a lot of colorful language. You can hit the bees on bonnet, brooch, bombazine, black butterfly, choker, and bootlace bow on page two. That's a fairly obvious section there that you can hit your bees on. Take your time, especially in the middle of page two, voice one on verse 29, time passes, and really take that time. In that sense, voice one is a lot like the stage manager of our town, drawing attention to the passage of time. There's a great deal of love for Captain Cat from voice one throughout the entire play. So be gentle when you talk about Captain Cat. On page three, second voice enters and totally changes the energy. Um, you're imagining the SS Kidwelly in a storm in his dreams. But almost as quickly, the drowned come in, and there is a certain sort of haunted, well, obviously haunted quality to them, almost an echoey quality to what they say. Certainly, they have their own personalities, um, but there's a certain drowsiness to the drowned that you'll want to deliver if you're playing one of the drowned. Captain Cat is quite alive with excitement seeing his old friends, but the drowned are rather lugubrious. This goes on for a couple of pages. We're on page four now. Still more going on. Voice two is playing Rosie Probert, the dear love of Captain Cat. I did go through page five, Dowlice and Maesguin, those pronunciations on verse two and five of page five. Captain Cat just feels nothing but loss in his life. He's sad. Captain Cat is sad, and later Captain Cat is crying. It's a very touching moment. First voice, we're and second voice, we're coming into a section about Maug Edwards and Mavonwe Price. They are as square as a city block, but they think that they are as passionate as Romeo and Juliet. Maug Edwards is probably more attached to his wallet than anything, but they're both dreaming of each other, so the dreams are combined with each other here in an interesting scene. They both love each other, and they will never make a move, ever. So they're our first odd group of characters in the show. So I would play both of them very prim and proper, almost feeling like they're being scandalous with their love. But Maug Edwards is talking about throwing cloth at her, basically. It's not that exciting. really. So we get to page 6. We're on verse 14. And first voices, you talk about Jack Black. You sort of take on some of the personality traits of Jack Black. He's wound up as tight as a spring. He's about to go postal on the entire world. He particularly, he would be a good character in like a slasher movie, because he hates people having sex, and he hates his own sexual thoughts himself. He shouts out Aki V. He's imagining himself with a whip driving out the couples that are making love with each other. Evan Zadeth is introduced at line 32. And I think of Evan Zadeth as kind of like Lurch. So think about this character in that way. I think Evan Zadeth has one line later in the show, but here's a good description of him. And it's actually kind of like before he changed to what he is now. It's snowflakes and currents and eating sweets under the covers and stuff like that. It's really sweet stuff, but he did change over time. Get to the top of page 7. We are here with Mr. Waldo. He is exuberant almost to a fault. He has slept with so many women. He drinks too much. He has weird ideas about how to cure certain ailments and stuff like that. He is extremely overweight. The 17 snoring gentle stone. That's look up how much a stone is. I think it's 16 pounds, so it's 17 times 16. And he's described as being larger than life, and he's larger in life in both ways, I would say. He has a sweet mother who talks to him in his dream, but then the mother turns into his wife, and the wife was not so sweet. Obviously, not happy about the drinking, not happy about the bad reputation that Mr. Waldo had. But later we're going to hear Mr. Waldo say, "Hush, love. I'm widower Waldo now. You're dead, so you can't bother me anymore." Now we move into the neighbors. These are what is known as stickamithia. So it is like fast delivered lines with little gap in between them, between these neighbors. They're like hunt a little, peck a little gossipers. I think that was what the play Oklahoma had, the hunt a little, peck a little, the gossips. These, what was it?
Music Man, I think.
Maybe it's Music Man. Yeah. Okay. They're like a flock of chickens, and they're all scandalized by Waldo. Every line is delivered as, "Oh, bad as his father. Oh, and you know where he ended up in the asylum." This goes on for a few pages, but it will read rather fast. So we're getting down to page 10. All neighbors, after you say on verse 17, after you say, "Learn him with a slipper on his BTM," I'd like you to all clap like you're giving him a spanking.
Glenn, I have a quick question. Back on page 9, I'm the first neighbor, and at line 8, it says singing in the W.
Yeah, in the WC, the water closet.
Oh, do I just say W though?
You just say W. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. W for short. Singing in the water. I don't know. It isn't a misprint, though. I do know that.
Okay.
And then the little girl, there is someone in the cast who's marked as little girl. So just check. make sure if it's you or not. I'll read the preacher part. And then they become the women that it's unclear whether Mr. Waldo actually married all these women or just bedded all these women and that they felt like they should become his wife. But it's a terrifying moment for Mr. Waldo. As they say, to be your awful wedded wife. Page 11.
Excuse me, real quick.
Yep.
When they're saying little boy, is that like Mr. Waldo, like in flashback kind of thing?
Yeah, so he might be a little more higher pitched on that.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
First voice on page 11 should introduce Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard as cold and as pristine and as crisp and as clear as possible. We're trying to convey the personality of Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard by the description of her. Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard is, she could be played as an old lady. She probably is an old lady at this point, but she is a very confident woman who directed her husbands to do all sorts of awful things in order to stay clean, keep the place clean. Ironically, she runs a boarding house, but she'll never have any guests because they're all too filthy for her. So she should deliver everything with great confidence and directness at Mr. Ogmore and Mr. Pritchard. This is the way things are done. And as long as things are done in a particular way, it's like she's OCD. As long as they're done in a particular way, everything's going to be okay. Ironically, she's imagining Mr. Ogmore and Mr. Pritchard in her dream fairly accurately. So Mr. Ogmore and Mr. Pritchard, you can be as downtrodden as you want in this scene. It's like a terrible life. And every night you get called into her room to do it all over again. So this section goes on, and poor Mr. Ogmore and poor Mr. Pritchard just deal with it. And then we get to top of 13. Gossamer Bynum, she has some fantasies in her mind that are constantly going. I think I wrote about it in my email. Just a moment. In the character descriptions that, pardon me for taking this time. Where is Gossamer?
So for
Yeah, she has hot dreams of foxy illicit love with sort of like Cro-Magnon man, basically, like man just birthed out of earth, basically. During the day, she longs to be with Sinbad sailors, but the two never interact with each other. She is, of course, a teacher, so she's got to maintain a certain an image in the town. But when we see her, we often see that her image drops, and we see how she really feels. And the only thing that Sinbad Sailor sees is how she walks through the town. Proud, he says. Why are you so proud? If you weren't so proud, we could love each other. Fact is, they do love each other, but they don't exactly know it. You were going to say, Laura?
Oh, I was just going to read the description of.
Yeah, I found it. Organ Morgan. It's organ all the time with him, which is a sort of double entendre description of him. He is just crazy about all things to do with the organ, plays the organ all the time. I played this part in undergrad. And he's just fixated on the music of the organ, Palestrina, great Bach, great composers of the organ, and is playing it all the time. And his dream is a nightmare of sound. Morgan describes. First Voice has a couple of descriptions of Mr. and Mrs. Floyd. We never actually meet them in the play. They're just described twice. And then Utah Watkins is, he's kind of a grumpy guy most of the time, especially with his animals, doesn't treat them very well. But I would play him bold and bossy, I guess. Aki Milkman. You can decide on page 14, Aki Milkman, if you want to make it that he's trying to jack up the price of his milk by pouring it in the Dowey River, or if he just doesn't have enough customers, which might be equally possible. Few separate descriptions. Cherry Owen is a happy drunk. And PC Attila Reese is another sort of gruff guy. He's the police constable. There is a little bit of a story here, First Voice. So don't forget that when he lumps out of bed to pee, he drags out his helmet because he's going to put that helmet on in the morning and be rather upset. Willy-nilly Postman. Yeah, this guy is a very high energy character, very positive. He steams open the letters and then tells people what's in the letters when he delivers them, and no one seems to mind. It's kind of weird. But it's describing how he's in his sleep and he's knocking on the door, and he goes like this with his hand, and that is interpreted by his wife as her getting spanked every night. So she's been late for school every night because he's always been knocking on her while she's sleeping, and she turns it into a dream about a spanking. Sinbad Sailors is introduced. He is dreaming of Gossamer Bynum. What else? Lily Smalls. Just a moment. I sometimes mix up some of these characters, so I got to make sure I get it right. Yeah, she has quite an active love/sex/fantasy life. She's pretty young. I don't think she even knows what a mogul is. She just has heard the word. So on line 45, she's like, what? Yeah, you will mogul, whatever you are. I don't know. She is rather, she has a rather tame life as the Bynum's maid, but she longs for something more exciting. Then May is very similar to Lily Smalls. She has a little grander sexual dreams here, imagining Mr. Right, another kind of nature-based character who's like a trout. So a little odd, but there you go. But these are dreams. We got to remember all of these are dreams, so they're going to be a little odd. First Voice, page 15, line 12. Introduce Bessie Bighead as with great understanding. And Bessie Bighead is an awkward girl who was made fun of, never did find love, was kissed once and just wished she could be kissed one more time. Kind of a sad character who works for Utah Watkins. Butcher Bynum is always making jokes about the kind of meat he's collecting, which is always questionable. And it starts off right off the bat here with Butcher Bynum saying he's selling on verse 25, owl meat, dog's eyes, and man chop. He loves to play tricks on his wife by saying that he's doing these things, but he really most likely is not. Organ Morgan, Gossamer Bynum are brought back. First voice sort of continues the very first monologue at verse 43 of page 15. Just chew up these descriptive words. Just really enjoy them. That's second voice, I'm sorry. First voice sort of changes the energy as we introduce Reverend Eli Jenkins, which I'll be reading. Reverend Eli Jenkins is kind of a sweet, blind to all the bad around him kind of guy, just always positive and a little crotchety, little fragile in his mind. He's kind of an old guy too, but he admires the history of Milkwood and he admires the history of the Druids. Mr. Pugh, I'm sort of introducing all these characters as they're introduced, and then I'll be able to move through scenes a little more quickly when we get later in the show. Mr. Pugh dreams of killing his wife, who is just really mean, and we're introduced to him here. He is always going to speak sort of with two voices, the voice that he's thinking about murder with, and then the voice that he actually speaks to his wife with, which is so kind of innocuous, dumb, and simple. In both productions I was in, I loved the Mr. and Mrs. Pugh section. Mrs. Organ Morgan, it should be clear from second voice that Mr. Organ Morgan is not snoring loudly. He snores no louder than a spider, but she dreams of silence, which is ironic because during the day she dreams of silence because of all the noise, but at night she's also dreaming of silence, even though he's very quiet. Mary Ann Sailors, sweet old lady, kind of fragile. She's Sinbad Sailor's grandmother that Sinbad says, if only grandma would die, then I could have Gossamer Bynum. But she is such a sweet lady who loves simple things. She does drop a bit of bigotry in her speech, though, referring to the Jippos clothes pegs. But she is really, by and large, a very sweet old lady who loves her life, who calls out her birth, how old she is every day, every morning. She just loves life. And she's pretty calm at this point, pretty sedate. We see some quick things here. Die Bread is a bigamist. Sorry, not a polygamist, but he dreams of polygamy here with harem. So I guess if you have two wives, you want another or more. Polly Garter has had a lot of babies through the years. No Good Boyo is kind of a high school dropout kind of guy. And Lord Cutglass is frankly the craziest guy in the entire town. He has a house full of clocks all set to different times. So then we have a little chapter break here at verse 35, page 17. First voice again comes back to that phrase, time passes, listen, time passes. Actually, when I delivered this section, I felt my pulse as I said that. Time passes. listen. Time passes. Which was sort of, I thought, reminiscent of the stage manager in our town. So we move into the voice of the guidebook, which is a very fun section. It should be delivered like a tour guide, if there ever were a tour guide to go to Milkwood. And they are, if you ever have heard like tour guides around the University of Michigan campus, you kind of get an idea of how they talk. They've said it a million times. They know how to say it, and they say it clearly and confidently, but there's a certain rote quality to it. So it comes out something like, less than 500 souls inhabit the 3 quaint streets and the few narrow bylanes. So I would deliver this speech much in that way if I were the voice of the guidebook. So now the sun is coming up, cock crows. We are going to skip all of these sound effects, but we will all be reading them. We'll know that they happen. When I did both productions, we did have live sound effects done by the actors. And it really made a nice, simple hint of where we were. Reverend Eli Jenkins comes out to deliver his poem. It's got the most Welsh terms in it, so that's why I decided to take the part of Reverend Eli Jenkins. These are all historical things that if you wanted to spend an hour or two with it, you would find out a lot about Wales, but it's a well-researched a well-researched poem by Reverend Eli Jenkins. And Lily Smalls, you'll notice second voice and first voice that every time Lily Smalls' name is spoken, that she's referred to as Mrs. Bynen's treasure. And this is one of the changes from the original script to this script, pulled from the way we did the performance, that I think is kind of fun because it's very ironic. Mrs. Bynen's treasure. Let's just say that. But we call it out every time, Mrs. Bynen's treasure. So Lily Smalls, you remember, is the maid of Butcher Bynen. Lily Smalls is looking in the mirror and kind of making fun of herself. She's got some body image issues here. She calls her nose a conch. So Mrs. Bynen is rather naive about Mr. Bynen. She wants to run a tip-top house. She believes everything Mr. Bynen says, even though Mr. Bynen's lying like crazy to her. But she wants the house to run shipshape, basically. Now we meet Mr. Pugh and Mrs. Pugh together. First voice, every time you, first and second voice, every time you talk about Mr. Pugh and Mrs. Pugh, take Mr. Pugh's side. He needs your help, and be against Mrs. Pugh. You're going to find it pays off if you play it that way. Mr. Pugh, with his murderous voice, starts things off and then meets Mrs. Pugh and says, "Nice tea, dear." We see Mrs. Pugh looking out through the door at the town, and we're going to have her comment on various things. And there's Lily Smalls, the treasure. And there's PC Attila Reese out, and he's black-browed under his damp helmet from last night, remember? Mrs. Pugh's kind of a mean lady. So she is like a sourpuss of the first degree. Whoever plays Mrs. Pugh, just sour it up, make everything negative, and have her pronounce her words with great clarity. Marianne Sailors announcing she's 85 years, 3 months and a day. And Mrs. Pugh says, I'll say this for her. She never makes a mistake. And we're talking about all the people that she's seeing. Mrs. Diebread 1 is kind of a plain Jane, older woman, like maybe the first wife of Diebread. Mrs. Diebread 2 is the younger, sexier. She describes herself as Gypsy to kill. She's a very grounded woman, I would say. Lord Cutglass is described, but we don't meet him yet. There's a big scene later. Miss Price, we see her during her ordinary day, square as a city block. Polly Garter and Captain Cat and Mrs. Diebread 2 are probably the most realistic performances we're going to hear in this show. They are less caricatures and they are grounded, down to earth people. Description of the town. Mr. Pugh is talked about willy-nilly, and Mrs. Willy-nilly are steaming open the mail, I believe. Yep, steaming open the mail. We're meeting various people. We finally hear from Lord Cutglass on page 25, and we see just how crazy he is with a little hint of that there. We're meeting various people. Now we get to Mr. and Mrs. Cherry Owen. Mrs. Cherry Owen is married to a drunk, and she loves it when he comes home drunk. She just thinks it's the funniest thing in the world. And Cherry Owen is like, what did I do? Tell me what I did, basically. That goes on to page 26. And then on 27, we see the Bynens again. And this is an example of what Mr. Bynon does to Mrs. Bynon, while Lily Smalls doesn't believe any of it. Funny joke on line 24, Mr. Bynon is talking about how at least he butchered a cat that was neutered. Just weird jokes in here. And Lily Smalls says he's a liar, but Mrs. Bynon says, don't you dare say that about him. She believes everything he says. And now we see a little bit of Sinbad. We're going to see more of him later. He's sad, as usual. Maybe he shouldn't run a bar. We see the town coming alive, school starting, stuff like that. We see that Mr. Edwards does love Miss Price. First voice on top of 29. Again, enjoy that language there, the various things in the list, and make each item in the list as different as you can. We have a nice scene between Captain Cat and the kids now at the middle of page 29, starting with verse 27, recognizing all the kids' names, mentioning that Billy Swansea has a dog's voice and likes to bark. And then we hear the barking and realize, yep, that's Billy. He's hearing willy-nilly knock at the various places. So there are scenes within the scene. Captain Cat's listening to all of it. You know, of course, that Captain Cat is blind, so his hearing is what he relies on. Willy-nilly is telling Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard what's in the letter to her, and she's saying she doesn't want to have any guests. We're on page 31. Willy-nilly sharing the gossip, basically, with Mrs. Pugh. And willy-nilly even tells Mrs. Pugh that Mr. Pugh has requested a book called Lives of the Great Poisoners. It's unbelievable what he shares with her. Moving on to 32. Mr. Waldo is discussed, but we don't hear much from him. But there's another paternity summons for Mr. Waldo. So there must be more. Captain Cat almost becomes like voice one at verse 31 of 32. Really enjoy and eat up this language. And it's all in love. He loves these people that surround him. I think I mentioned that in an earlier version of this script, Captain Cat was going to defend these people in court against the government who wanted to declare the entire village insane. So he loves these people with all of their oddities. And we should hear that here. Page 33, continuing with Polygarter. He admires Polygarter. They are perhaps two of the most normal, down-to-earth people in the entire town. And then we get to page 34 with first voice again, chewing up words. Just enjoy those words. A lot of C sounds: curlew, cry, crow, caw, pigeon, coo, clock, strike. Lots of k sounds in there. And we're back to basically the same neighbors as before. It's another section of Stickamithia. It's like lots of gossip going back and forth. No one's impressed by anyone, except they do think Mr. Ogmore was a proper gentleman, even though he hanged his collie. But this should go pretty quick, and it's all about gossip. Hunt a little, peck a little again. This goes on to page 36, and we discover that second woman is Mrs. Organ Morgan, because it gets more specific and talks about how she can't stand the sound of the organ all the time. Evans of Death, we finally meet on verse 29 of page 36, and delivered much like Lurch might. Gossamer Bynum just wants to be loved on verse 35. And we meet Jack Black for the first time. He actually speaks, and he's feeling a certain sexual urge that he's trying to beat down with his hammer, basically, as he works. All right. Captain Cat is taking a nap on page 37, and that sort of ends the whole Captain Cat section. And we get another view of on page 37, verse 18 of willy-nilly, and his willy-nilly examining the mail, knows everyone's business. Mog Edwards, talking about Mavonwe Price, is being read by Mrs. Willy-nilly, but we get to have Mog Edwards deliver the speech. And on page 38, I'm not sure who's playing the fisherman, but I really want that line on verse 35 to be very low key and matter of fact. So second voice describes how completely calm the water is out in the bay, but the fisherman just doesn't want to go out. So he says it's too rough for fishing today. So he doesn't have to go. So he doesn't have to go fishing, but he can go to the Sailor's Arms. This song on page 39 will be played on YouTube, so no pressure on that. It's a kid's song. I actually taught my kids this song, and they're like, "That's a weird song." Kept their baby in a milking pail. What? Descriptions of various people coming out of page 39 onto page 40. And then we're finally with Mr. and Miss with Mrs. Diebread 1 and Diebread 2. In this scene, Diebread 2 is completely lying to Diebread 1 about what she sees in the glass, and always conveniently the glass goes cloudy whenever Mrs. Diebread 1 asks a question. But Mrs. Diebread 1 is totally gullible and totally buys into the whole thing. Page 41, Polly Garter, another song. This will be played on YouTube for our reading. Basically, a song that size doesn't matter. Reverend Eli Jenkins, blind to what's really going on in the song, says, "Praise the Lord, we're a musical nation." Page 42. Sinbad kind of reveals how he feels about Gossamer Bynum to someone. He confides in Mr. Waldo. And then we have Sinbad and the children merging together with this conversation and some songs and Polly Garter's song. So it kind of all merges together in one between the middle of 42 and the top of page 43. If you guys playing Polly Garter and the children can sort of mimic singing, that would be great. Maybe something like, "Tom, Dick, and Harry were three fine men, and I'll never have such ding-a-ding again." A little joke there from Dylan Thomas. Ding-a-ding, of course, is sex. So then we move into the girls and boys song. I'll play this on YouTube as well. It's sort of a very musical section. Basically, what goes on is that the girls are getting a penny out of all these guys. If these guys refuse to kiss Gwenny, they have to pay a penny, and the last boy who shows up doesn't want to kiss Gwenny and doesn't have a penny and gets beat up by the girls. But first voice at the bottom of page 45, I want you to take the heart of this poor boy who was beaten up by these girls and really take pity on this boy. Okay. This speech really does take pity on the boy. And then it switches to talking about Miss Mavonwe Price's candy store, and all is forgotten, which is true for kids too, right? So it morphs from a real sensitive speech into just the joy of sweets. Gossamer Bynum is thinking about Sinbad's sailors. She doesn't care if he's common. She wants him. And Sinbad sailor is totally misreading Gossamer Bynum, thinks she's just so proud. So it's sort of a little bit of dramatic irony for the audience. We're on page 47 now. First voice talking about Mr. and Mrs. Pugh. Again, you'll get a lot of mileage if you take Mr. Pugh's side in all of these. You love what Mr. Pugh is planning and you just wish he'd act on it. Mr. and Mrs. Pugh is she's got these zingers for Mr. Pugh all the way through, and the narrator is full of these little details that just describe the amount of disdain she has for her husband. And then on page 48, we see the first hint that first voice really does want Mr. Pugh to kill Mrs. Pugh. Verse 17. That paragraph ends with a big exclamation point, and then it's totally undercut by Mr. Pugh, who, after all of these imaginings by first voice in his head, simply says, "You know best, dear." So loved all of these Mr. and Mrs. Pugh scenes. Have a lot of fun with those. Mrs. Oregon Morgan are eating together as well. It's a different kind of feel. Mr. Oregon Morgan is not really paying attention to anything that Mrs. Oregon Morgan is saying about what's going on around town because his mind is in the clouds with Bach and Palestrina. Now, page 50. This is the big scene for Lord Cutglass. It's kind of a shame. I don't know that we will actually get. We had one line from Mr. Cutglass, Lord Cutglass, but he doesn't speak here. It is a complete description of how Lord Cutglass's mind works. It should be delivered crisply. It should be delivered almost like you're a mechanical clock, the way you clip your consonants. Lots of C's in this, lots of interesting consonants to talk about, and interesting ways to talk about clocks that totally make sense, clocks that bicker. It just, you totally know how that clock sounds. It's brilliant how it's described. And second voice continues the thought process of Lord Cutglass, why he has all of these clocks, because he thinks Armageddon is coming. Polly Garter, can you deliver the lines on page 50, verse 40? You can just deliver them sort of pseudo sing-songy. It's the same melody as her earlier song, but we realize that the reason why she doesn't have Willie Wee is because he's dead, which is a sad moment. 51. Now we're in the late afternoon, and Mrs. Pugh should come in on verse 20 and just totally blow everything that first voice was talking about. Donkeys angelically drowse on donkey down. Persons with manners. So come right in on that, Mrs. Pugh. And we're right back with Mr. and Mrs. Pugh. And this time, at the bottom of page 51, second voice gets a chance to express how much she wishes that Mr. Pugh would kill Mrs. Pugh. And then page 52, Mr. Pugh undercuts it again. I beg your pardon, my dear. So after all of these imaginings of killing, we get Mr. Pugh undercutting it. Now we get to a sort of a dream sequence. I think he is slumbering. Yeah, slumbers and voyages. Page 52. It's similar to the first drown, second drown scene that we had earlier. Rosie Probert should probably deliver these lines a little lackadaisically, but she does care for Captain Cat, don't get me wrong, but just sort of long tones and like the dead, if you will. And then Rosie and Captain Cat have a call and response poem with each other, which is just going to be lovely. You see the love that they have for each other in this. I imagine sort of Rosie Probert as There was a character in The Sting. She ran a whorehouse, and she was the girlfriend of Paul Newman in The Sting. If you know that movie, sort of Rosie Probert can be played sort of like that woman. I think it was Colleen Dewhurst who played that part. We get to 54, and we see how much Captain Cat misses Rosie Probert. A child sees that Captain Cat is crying. Page 54, verse 21, Captain Cat is crying, first voice. I could never deliver that. I could barely keep from crying myself as I said that line. So it is a sad line. And now we're with No Good Boyo fishing. And he's imagining Mrs. Diebread too, the gypsy wife of Mr. Diebread, with a corset, and offers her a corset, and she's not going to have anything to do with this little kid. He's probably, I don't know, 15, 16, something like that. And No Good Boyo on verse 35 of page 55, you can deliver that as the sad tragedy of No Good Boyo. I want to be good Boyo, but nobody will let me, which I find hilarious. 56, we get a description of Miss May Rose Cottage. She is sort of daydreaming at the age of 17. Reverend Eli Jenkins returns briefly, talking about his upbringing. And then Utah Watkins finally gets introduced at page 57 near the end of the show. And we see Utah Watkins angry at all of his animals, thinks that they're trying to kill him, etc. And they just love the heck out of him. So he's completely wrong in his opinion of the animals. And we finally hear from Bessie Bighead with perhaps the longest thing that Bessie Bighead says, talking about the cows. And page 57, verse 32, again, a great deal of love and understanding from first voice for Bessie Bighead, okay? Keep in mind that the White Book of Llyn is written by Eli Jenkins, so we get a clue as to how she's described by Eli Jenkins, the Reverend. Very touching speech. And Utah Watkins cuts through all that by shouting at his horse. Page 58, and we are getting to bedtime. And once again, it's time for Mr. Ogmore and Mr. Pritchard to return to Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard. However, this time is slightly different. They have their tasks to do. And Mrs. Ogmore is a little saucy tonight. Page 58, verse 46, she admits that she loves them both. And at the very end, page 59, after telling them what to do, after them telling her what they have to do with their pajamas, she kind of saucily says, and then you must take them off on verse 15. So that is truly horrifying to Mr. Ogmore and Mr. Pritchard, who both respond in utter horror. We're meeting various people here as we close out the day. And we have another poem by Eli Jenkins, this time with no Welsh, thank goodness. Jack Black returns, Cherry Owen returns. We find out a little bit at the bottom of page 60 what his wife likes about that. She says she's got two husbands, one drunk and one sober, which I guess is really great to her. She's a lucky woman, she says. Page 61, we're getting to the end of the day, we're coming back to people who basically have not changed. Now, isn't that the nature of comedy? That's why I call this a comedy. The crazy characters never actually change personalities at all. They're the same at the end as they are at the beginning. So that's why I would say deliver it as comedy. We get a little lullaby for a grandpa there at the bottom of page 61. And then 62, one last hurrah. Yeah, bottom of 62, one last hurrah from Mr. Waldo with his song about a chimney sweep. And it's lewd as well. So play up the lewdness. And we see the first drown, second drown, third drown again, much the same. We see that nothing much has changed in that regard. And then Organ Morgan is actually walking through the graveyard and sees someone lying on a tombstone and thinks it's Johann Sebastian Bach, but it's really just Sherry Owens sleeping one off. And Sherry Owens doesn't know what the heck is up with him. Bon Price and Maug Edwards happily apart from one another, verse 31 of page 64. And we see some similarity to what we heard at the beginning. And then 65, one last touch from Polly Garter, finishing off the song about little Willie Wee and missing him because he's dead. And the end speech by First Voice should harken back to the first speech. And it's again a time of peace, of beauty. I like the idea that it's milk waking wood, that the wood is coming alive. The woods are coming alive in the darkness. And it sort of harkens back to the various characters and their take on everything. As you deliver this speech, First Voice, take on the opinions of each character you describe while you say it. All right. There you are. That's it.